My grandfather gave my sister a luxury villa and left me an empty parking lot. You can always sleep under the stars, my parents snickered. But when I turned it into a business, they wanted a share. The first time I saw it, there was a seagull standing in the middle of the cracked asphalt, staring at me like I was the one who didn't belong. Maybe I didn't. My grandfather's lawyer had driven me out there himself, 45 minutes from the reading of the will, past the edge of town, past the last strip mall, past the point where cell service started to stutter. He kept apologizing the whole way, kept saying things like, "I'm sure Harold had his reasons, and real estate is real estate, and location, location, location." As if repetition could transform what we both knew was happening into something other than what it was. The lot was exactly 0.73 acres. I know because I asked later, when I was trying to understand. When I was still looking for the logic, the hidden meaning, the secret gift wrapped in apparent cruelty. My grandfather had been many things. Difficult, stubborn, occasionally brilliant, but he had never been random. Every decision he made had a reason, even if he never bothered to explain it. So 0.73 acres, rectangular, bordered on one side by a drainage ditch, and on the other 3 by chain-link fence that had rusted into a kind of burnt orange color, like the whole property was slowly bleeding. There were weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement, and someone had dumped a shopping cart near the back corner. The shopping cart had a child's sandal caught in its wheels. Just one sandal, pink with a little flower on the strap. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes after the lawyer left, trying to feel something. Anger seemed appropriate. So did grief, confusion, hurt. But mostly what I felt was that specific numbness that comes when reality is so far from expectation that your brain just stops processing. My sister Amelia got the villa in Lake Como, 4 bedrooms, original 19th century architecture, private dock, staff quarters, an actual vineyard on the adjacent hillside that came with the property, though it hadn't produced wine in decades. And I got a parking lot in Millbrook, New Jersey. You can see why the seagull and I had something in common. Neither of us was supposed to be there. The reading of the will had been 3 hours earlier, in the wood-paneled office of Mitchell & Associates, where our family had conducted its legal business for 4 generations. My parents were there. Amelia was there, though she'd flown in from Milan and kept checking her phone under the table like she had somewhere more important to be, which, to be fair, she probably did. Amelia always had somewhere more important to be. Our mother was wearing black, which seemed performative given that she and grandfather hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Our father was wearing the expression he always wore at family functions, vaguely, present, carefully neutral, ready to agree with whoever had the most money. I was wearing jeans and a sweater because I'd driven straight from my apartment without changing. And I remember thinking that maybe I should have dressed better, that maybe grandfather would somehow know, would somehow judge me from whatever afterlife he'd found himself in. Though if grandfather was judging anyone, it probably wasn't for their fashion choices. The lawyer read through the preliminary stuff first. The small bequest to staff, to a few charities, to an old business partner who'd helped him during a rough patch in the 70s. Normal things, expected things. Then, to my granddaughter Amelia Louise Kavanaugh, I bequeath the property known as Villa Serena, located at... Amelia made a small sound, not quite a gasp, but close to it. She'd been to the villa once, when she was 16, for some kind of summer art program that grandfather had sponsored. She'd talked about it for years afterward, the light on the water, the way the mountains looked in the morning, the little cafe in the village where she'd had her first real espresso, and felt, she said, like she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. Our mother reached over and squeezed Amelia's hand, and they exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read, pride maybe, or relief, or something else entirely. To my grandson, Thomas Reed Kavanaugh, I sat up straighter. Not because I expected anything specific. I'd never been close to grandfather the way Amelia had. Never quite fit into his vision of what a Kavanaugh grandchild should be. But still, there was something. There had to be something. I bequeathed the property located at 4751 Industrial Boulevard, Millbrook, New Jersey, in its entirety, including all structures, improvements, and appurtenances thereto. Silence. Then my mother. What property? Then my father. Millbrook? Where's Millbrook? Then Amelia, not even looking up from her phone. Is that the parking lot? He used to have some kind of parking lot somewhere, didn't he? The lawyer cleared his throat. It's a commercial lot, approximately 3/4 of an acre, currently undeveloped. Undeveloped, my mother repeated. You mean empty? There's a structure on the property, a small booth, I believe, for a parking attendant. I couldn't speak, couldn't quite make my mouth form words. My mother turned to me with an expression that I recognized from childhood, pity mixed with a kind of vindicated disappointment, like she'd always known I would end up on the short end of something, and here, finally, was proof. Oh, Tommy, I'm so sorry. But she wasn't sorry. I could hear it in her voice, see it in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. She was relieved. The inheritance had been distributed unfairly, absurdly, almost comically unfairly, but at least the unfairness had gone in the right direction. Amelia, who was beautiful and successful and exactly what a Kavanaugh should be, had received a villa, and I, who was none of those things, had received what I deserved. Nothing, or close enough to nothing that it didn't matter. Well, my father said, in that voice he used when he wanted to move past something uncomfortable, I'm sure Harold had his reasons. And Amelia laughed. Not cruelly exactly, more like reflexively, like she couldn't quite help it. You can always sleep under the stars, Tommy, the fresh New Jersey air. Think of it as glamping. My mother laughed too, then my father, joining in because he always joined in. And I sat there in that wood-paneled office, while my family laughed about my inheritance like it was a joke grandfather had told from beyond the grave. The seagull was still there when I finished remembering all of this. It had moved closer, hopping across the asphalt with that mechanical, jerky motion that seagulls have, looking for food probably, looking for something worth the effort of landing. There was nothing here worth the effort of landing. I walked the perimeter of the lot, more because I didn't know what else to do than because I expected to find anything. The fence was in worse shape than I'd thought. Several sections had collapsed entirely, creating gaps big enough for a person to walk through. The drainage ditch was half full of stagnant water and what looked like decades of accumulated trash. The booth the lawyer had mentioned was about the size of a porta-potty, with a window that had been broken and covered with plywood, and a door that hung at an angle from one rusted hinge. Inside the booth, there was a chair, a metal folding chair, the kind you'd see at a church basement potluck, with a torn cushion that might once have been green. Someone had left a magazine on the floor, so water-damaged and sun-faded that I couldn't tell what it had been. A calendar on the wall showed March 1987. March 1987. I hadn't even been born yet. I sat down in the chair because there was nothing else to do, and the seagull hopped up to the window and looked at me through the gap between the plywood and the frame. We regarded each other for a long moment. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked it. The seagull didn't answer, just tilted its head, then flew away, heading east toward the highway, and the sound of traffic that was, I realized, the only sound I could hear. No birds singing, no wind in trees, just the distant hum of cars going somewhere else. I didn't tell anyone about the lot for almost a week. Didn't tell my roommate, who probably would have laughed. Didn't tell my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend technically, though we hadn't officially broken up yet. Just stopped calling each other and started pretending we were both too busy to notice. Didn't tell my friends, though that would have required me to have friends who would care, and most of the people I knew in the city were more like acquaintances who occasionally texted me about parties. I went to work, I came home, I ate takeout, over the sink, and watched shows I couldn't remember afterward. I tried not to think about Amelia in her villa, probably walking through rooms with high ceilings and ancient tile floors, probably sipping wine on her private dock while the sun set over the mountains. I tried not to think about my parents, who had called me twice that week, once to ask if I wanted to sell the lot and split the proceeds with the family for fairness, and once to remind me that Amelia's birthday was coming up and maybe I should send something nice. I tried not to think about grandfather, who had died without explaining anything, without leaving a letter or a note or even a hint about why he had done what he had done. But mostly I tried not to think about myself, about the fact that I was 31 years old and living in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a job that paid just enough to cover rent and nothing else. About the fact that my family had always looked at me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. About the fact that maybe grandfather had given me exactly what I deserved. Nothing, or close enough to nothing. The second time I went to the lot, It was raining. I'm not sure why I went. Curiosity, maybe, or masochism, or just the need to see it again, to confirm that it was as bad as I remembered, that I hadn't exaggerated its awfulness in my mind. I hadn't. The rain turned the cracked asphalt into a network of small rivers, all flowing toward the drainage ditch. The shopping cart was still there, the seagull was not. The booth leaked in 3 places, water dripping onto the chair and the ruined magazine and the calendar that was still stuck in March 1987. But standing there, watching the rain, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. Cars. Not on the lot, on the road in front of it. Industrial Boulevard, which I had assumed was empty and forgotten, actually had traffic. Not a lot, but enough. Every few minutes, a car would pass heading toward the highway entrance that was maybe half a mile east. Some of them were commuters, judging by the time. It was early evening, just past rush hour. Some of them were trucks, probably heading to or from the warehouses I could see in the distance. And some of them slowed down when they passed the lot. Slowed down and looked, like they were considering something. I watched for maybe an hour. In that time, 3 cars actually pulled into the entrance I hadn't really registered before, the gap in the fence where a driveway must have been. They'd idle for a moment, looking around at the emptiness, then pull back out and drive away. Looking for parking, I realized. Looking for somewhere to leave their car while they did. Whatever it was people did out here, walked to the warehouses maybe, or caught a bus, or just needed a place to stop. And there was nowhere. Nothing between here and the highway except empty lots and chain-link fences and roads that didn't go anywhere. I stood in the leaking booth and watched the cars pass, and for the first time since the reading of the will, I felt something that wasn't numbness. I'm not sure what to call it. Not hope exactly. More like attention, like some part of my brain had started paying attention to something other than the awfulness of my situation. The lot was worthless, yes, but it was also here. It existed. It occupied space in the world, space that people apparently wanted, even if they didn't know it yet. I drove home that night thinking about the cars, about the way they slowed down, about the gap in the fence and the rusted booth and the cracked asphalt that was, despite everything, still asphalt. Still a surface you could park on. The next morning, I called the municipal office in Millbrook. I'd never called a municipal office before. I'd never had any reason to. But I'd spent the night actually researching, which was something I rarely did for anything other than work. And I'd found the number and written it down and stared at it for a long time before finally dialing. The woman who answered sounded like she had been answering phones for decades and had long since stopped finding any of it interesting. Millbrook Township, how may I direct your call? I'm trying to find out about permits, I said. For a parking lot? Commercial or residential? Commercial, I think. It's already a lot. I just want to know what I'd need to do to actually operate it. She transferred me to someone else and who transferred me to someone else, who finally put me on hold for 15 minutes before coming back on the line and reading from what sounded like a very long document. Commercial parking operations in Millbrook required a valid business license, application fee $350, a commercial property inspection, fee $200, proof of liability insurance, amount dependent on lot size, a stormwater management plan. If the lot exceeded 10,000 square feet, compliance with ADA accessibility requirements, an approved site plan showing ingress, egress, and any structures, appropriate signage meeting municipal code specifications. I wrote all of it down. The list filled 2 pages of the legal pad I'd grabbed from my desk. Is there anything else? The woman asked when she was done. How long does all this take to get approved? Depends on the condition of the property. If everything's in order, maybe 6 weeks. If there's remediation required, remediation. Environmental issues. Old industrial sites sometimes have contamination. Soil testing might be required depending on the property's history. I thought about the drainage ditch, about the decades of trash accumulating in it, about whatever had been there before the lot, before 1980s, before the calendar on the wall stopped being updated. What was the property before? I asked. Do you have records of that? More hold music, more waiting. Then, according to our records, it was a service station until 1985. Gas station, I mean. There was a remediation order issued in 1986 for underground storage tank removal, But it looks like… What? It looks like the order was completed, tanks removed, soil tested, property certified clean as of October 1986. Lucky you, that's one thing you won't have to worry about. Lucky me. I thanked her and hung up and stared at my list of requirements. $350 for the business license, $200 for the inspection, insurance, probably at least a few hundred a month, site plan, signage, repairs to the fence and the booth. I had about $4,000 in savings. Not enough to live on for more than a couple of months, but enough to start. Maybe. If I was careful, if I didn't make any mistakes. If this wasn't all completely insane. I quit my job 3 weeks later, not because I was ready. I wasn't ready. I hadn't even submitted the business license application yet. I was still gathering documents, still trying to figure out how to write a site plan, still waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic about what I was doing. But my manager called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and told me that there were going to be some changes. Restructuring, he said, though we both knew what that meant. Am I being laid off? He made a face like I'd said something slightly rude. We're offering you an opportunity to transition, voluntarily. With severance? 2 months, and you can keep your health insurance through the end of the year. I should have been devastated. Should have fought, argued, demanded more. But sitting there in his office, looking at the framed motivational posters and the dead plant in the corner and the window that looked out onto the building next door, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I wanted to be unemployed, not because I had some grand vision of success, but because the decision had been made for me. The safety net was gone whether I wanted it to be or not. The only path now was forward. Okay, I said. My manager looked surprised. You're not going to? I mean, HR can explain the details of the package. I said okay. I stood up. I walked out. I cleaned out my desk, which took about 4 minutes because I'd never really made the space mine. And I took the elevator down to the lobby, and I walked out onto the street into bright spring sunshine that felt like it was mocking me, and I drove to Millbrook. The first month, I worked on the lot alone. Every day from sunrise until I couldn't see anymore, I worked. Pulled weeds, filled cracks with the cheapest asphalt patch I could find. Cleared the drainage ditch of trash, 6 shopping carts in total, plus more bottles and cans and random detritus than I could count. Fixed the fence. Replaced the plywood on the booth window with actual glass that I bought from a salvage yard for $30. I learned things I'd never thought I'd need to know. How to mix concrete. How to read a property survey. How to negotiate with the guy at the hardware store for a bulk discount on traffic cones. I got a sunburn, then a tan, then skin that looked like it belonged to someone who worked outside for a living. I lost weight. Not because I was trying to, but because I kept forgetting to eat, kept pushing through lunch and dinner in favor of one more repair, one more improvement, one more task crossed off the endless list. My mother called once during that month. She asked what I was doing with myself now that I'd lost my job. She'd heard from a cousin who'd heard from someone at the company. And I said I was working on something. Working on what? A project. What kind of project? The lot, I said. Grandfather's lot. I'm fixing it up. Silence on the line. Then a laugh. Not a nice laugh, but not exactly mean either. More like confused. Like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. Tommy, honey, why would you do that? The lot isn't worth anything. Even if you fixed it up, what would you do with it? Start a business in Millbrook? Yes, I said. That's exactly what I'm going to do. More silence, then. I think you should talk to someone. A professional, I mean. This sounds like, I don't know, a grief response? It's not healthy to become obsessed with something just because your grandfather left it to you. He probably didn't even remember he owned it. He remembered. How do you know? I didn't know. Not really, but I also knew, somewhere deep, in a place that didn't require evidence, that grandfather hadn't forgotten, that he'd made a choice, that there was a reason, even if I couldn't see it yet. I have to go, Mom. Tommy. I hung up, and I went back to work. The inspection happened on a Thursday in late April. The inspector was a man named Gary, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He walked around the lot with a clipboard, making marks and notes and sounds that could have meant anything. He checked the fence, the booth, the asphalt, the drainage. He asked questions about my insurance. I'd gotten a policy the week before, minimum coverage, $437 a month. He took pictures of everything. At the end, he stood in the middle of the lot and looked around, his expression unreadable. "You did all this yourself?" "Mostly. I hired someone to help with the drainage. And the striping, I'm having a company come next week to paint the parking lines." "How many spaces?" 24, that's the maximum for the square footage. He nodded, made another mark on his clipboard. "The booth needs a fire extinguisher, and you need emergency contact information posted visibly. And your signage," he pointed to the hand-painted sign I'd made, which said parking in letters that were slightly uneven. "That needs to meet code, size, reflectivity, mounting height." "I'll fix it." "And you need to submit your hours of operation to the municipal office. And your rates. They have to be posted at the entrance." "Okay." He looked at me for a long moment. Not unkindly, but with something like curiosity. "You know this area, right? You know what kind of businesses are out here?" "Warehouses mostly, logistics companies, a few factories." "And you think there's enough demand for parking? From warehouse workers?" "There's a bus stop half a mile east," I said. "And the highway entrance is just past that. I've seen people park on the side of the road because there's nowhere else. They get tickets. They get towed. All I have to do is be a better option than getting towed." Gary looked at me, looked around the lot, looked back at me. "You might be on to something," he said. "Or you might be crazy. I can't tell yet. Can you tell me if I passed the inspection?" He almost smiled. "You passed. Conditional on the fixes I mentioned. Get those done by next Friday and I'll sign off on your license." He left. I stood in the middle of my lot, and watched his car drive away. And for the first time since grandfather's funeral, I let myself believe that this might actually work. Opening day was May 15th. I remember because it was exactly 2 months after the reading of the will. 2 months since I'd sat in that wood-paneled office and listened to my family laugh about my inheritance. 2 months since I'd stood in the rain watching cars slow down and wonder what I was supposed to do. I'd done everything the inspector asked. New sign, professionally made this time, reflective letters, proper mounting. Fire extinguisher in the booth, emergency contact posted. Hours of operation posted. Rates posted. $5 per day, $25 per week, $80 per month. I'd underpriced it deliberately, wanted to get people in the door, or the gate, technically, since I'd installed an actual gate at the entrance, operated by a code I'd give to monthly subscribers. The first day, no one came. I sat in the booth from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. watching traffic pass, and not a single car pulled in. Not a single person stopped to look. The lot was clean, painted, organized, and completely empty. I went home that night and lay on my mattress and stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother's voice on the phone. A grief response. Not healthy. Why would you do that? The second day, one car. A guy in a pickup who needed somewhere to leave his truck while he walked to a job site nearby. He paid me $5 in crumpled singles and looked at me like I was slightly crazy. "This place used to be abandoned," he said. "Used to dump my old tires here. Sorry about that, by the way." "It's okay. You bought it or something?" "Inherited it." "Huh." He looked around. "Well, good luck. You're gonna need it. But here's the thing about luck. Sometimes it shows up when you least expect it." 3 weeks after opening, a woman named Patricia Martinez walked onto my lot. She was maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of tired, practical energy that comes from solving problems for a living. She looked at the lot, looked at the booth, looked at me. "You the owner?" "Yes, ma'am." "You got monthly rates?" $80. Comes with a code for the gate." "How many spaces you got?" 24. She nodded slowly, walked the perimeter of the lot the way I had that first day, except she seemed to be actually evaluating something rather than just processing shock. "I run a staffing agency," she said when she came back. "Warehouses, logistics, manufacturing. I've got about 200 workers placed within a mile of here, and half of them don't have reliable transportation. They carpool, take buses, get rides from family members. But the thing is, there's nowhere for them to meet up. Nowhere central. They end up parking in places they're not supposed to, getting tickets, getting their cars towed, losing time and money they can't afford." I felt something shift in my chest. A tension again. That same feeling from the rainy day when I'd noticed the cars slowing down. How many of them would need parking? I don't know, 20, maybe 30 if the price was right. 80 a month is the standard rate, but if you're talking volume, I'm talking partnership, she said. I'll send workers your way. Guaranteed minimums. In exchange, you give them a discount. 60 a month instead of 80. And you let them use the lot as a meeting point even if they're not parking, just a safe place to wait for their carpool, that kind of thing. I thought about it. Did the math in my head. Even at $60, 30 customers would be $100 to $800 a month, more than enough to cover insurance and then some. Why would you do that? I asked. What's in it for you? She looked at me like I'd asked something obvious. My workers show up on time. I look good. My workers get tickets and lose their jobs because they're dealing with impounded cars. I look bad. It's not complicated. It wasn't complicated. And just like that, I had a business. The first year was hard, not the work. The work was actually satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. Greeting the morning arrivals, clearing trash, making sure the lights worked. I'd installed lights in month 3, after someone complained about feeling unsafe leaving their car after dark. Learning the names of my regulars, their jobs, their families, the small details of their lives that they shared while paying their monthly fees. The hard part was everything else. The calls from my mother, who kept suggesting I sell the lot and do something reasonable with my life. The silence from Amelia, who had moved into the Lake Como villa full-time and didn't seem to know or care that I existed. The moments late at night when I'd look at my bank balance, slowly growing, yes, but still so far from stable, and wonder if I was fooling myself. The hardest part was the doubt, not about the business. The business was working. By the end of the first year, I had 42 monthly subscribers. I'd raised the rate to $70. Patricia's workers still got their discount, but new customers paid full price. I'd hired a part-time attendant named Marcus to cover the evenings so I could actually have a life outside the lot. No, the doubt was about something else, something harder to name. It was about worth, about whether I deserved any of this, the success, small as it was, about whether I'd somehow cheated, been lucky, stumbled into something I hadn't earned, about whether grandfather had known, somehow, that this would happen, or whether he'd just been cruel and I'd managed to spin cruelty into something functional. I thought about calling Amelia, thought about telling her what I'd built, how the empty lot she'd laughed about was now a functioning business that employed people and served a community. But every time I picked up the phone, I put it back down. What would be the point? She had her villa, I had my lot. We had both gotten exactly what grandfather wanted us to have. The second year, I expanded, not the lot itself. That was still 0.73 acres, still 24 spaces, still bordered by the drainage ditch on one side, and the rusted fence on the other 3. But the services, the business, the thing I was building, it started with Patricia Martinez again. My workers need more than parking, she said one afternoon, standing in the lot while a light rain fell. They need food, they need somewhere to sit. They need a bathroom that's not a gas station half a mile away. I can't build a restaurant on a parking lot. No, but you could bring food to them. She showed me what she meant. A food truck. Not one I'd own, I didn't have the capital for that, but one I'd partner with. Give them space on the lot in exchange for a cut of the proceeds. The workers would have somewhere to buy lunch. The food truck would have guaranteed customers. Everyone wins. I found a truck operator named Raul, who made tamales that were, genuinely, the best I'd ever had. We worked out a deal. He'd park in the corner of the lot from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., Mondays through Fridays. I'd get 10% of his gross, plus he'd handle his own permits and insurance. By the end of that month, he was selling out every day. Then I added a second truck, then a third, then this was Patricia's idea again, a small covered seating area where people could eat even in bad weather. The seating area cost me almost everything I'd saved. $12,000 for the materials, another $3,000 for the permits, and I did most of the construction myself over a series of weekends because I couldn't afford contractors. When it was done, it looked rough. Plywood and corrugated metal and plastic chairs I'd bought in bulk from a restaurant supply store. But people used it. They sat there during their lunch breaks, eating Raul's tamales and talking about their lives. They lingered after their shifts, waiting for carpools that were running late. They started calling the lot by a name I hadn't chosen, Patricia's Place, after the woman who'd brought most of them there in the first place. I didn't correct them. The name felt right. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized I was happy. Not deliriously happy. Not the kind of happiness you see in movies, where everything falls into place and the music swells and finally, that you've made it. But a quieter kind. The kind that comes from doing something useful, something real, something that matters to people who aren't you. I was 33 years old. I owned a parking lot. And I was happy. My family found out about my success in the worst possible way. It was the beginning of year 3. I'd just been featured in a local newspaper article. Small paper, circulation maybe 10,000. But still. The headline was, "From Empty Lot to Community Hub. How One Man Turned Unwanted Inheritance into Thriving Business." The reporter had spent a whole day at the lot, interviewing me and Patricia and Raul and some of the regular parkers. She'd taken pictures of the seating area, the food trucks, the gate with its keypad, and the booth with its new, actual windows. She'd written about the staffing agency partnership, the expansion plans I was considering, the profit margin that had gone from non-existent to modest to actually respectable. The article went online the same day it printed. 2 days later, my mother called. "Thomas." She never called me Thomas. It was always Tommy, usually said with a slight edge of disappointment. "Hi, Mom. I just got off the phone with your Aunt Judith. She sent me an article." I knew which article, knew what was coming, still felt my stomach drop. "The one about the lot?" "The lot, yes, the lot that you told me was worthless. The lot that I suggested you sell for whatever you could get. The lot that your grandfather left you instead of anything actually valuable." "I didn't say it was worthless. You said you were working on a project. You made it sound like a hobby, like something to keep yourself busy while you figured out your real life. You didn't mention that you'd turned it into a..." She paused, probably looking at the article again. "A thriving business. It's not that big a deal, Mom. The article says you're making 6 figures. I wasn't, not yet. But I was close. Close enough that the reporter had rounded up or made assumptions or done whatever reporters do when they want a better story. The article got some things wrong. Does your sister know about this?" And there it was, the real question, the one that mattered. "I haven't talked to Amelia in..." "She should know, Thomas. She should know that you've been sitting on this success while she's been struggling." I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. "Amelia's struggling? She has a villa in Lake Como." "The villa costs money to maintain. Staff, repairs, taxes. She's been dealing with all of it alone. Meanwhile, you've been building this little empire." "It's a parking lot, Mom. It's not an empire. And you haven't even thought about sharing any of it with your family. After everything we did for you growing up. After everything your grandfather did for you." I thought about the reading of the will, the laughter. You can always sleep under the stars. Grandfather gave me an empty lot and gave Amelia a mansion. You told me to sell it for scrap, and now that I've made something of it, now that I've worked for 3 years to turn his joke into a business, now you want me to share? It's only fair. "No," I said. "It's not." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt for the first time in my life like I'd told my mother the truth. Amelia came to see the lot 2 weeks later. She didn't call first, didn't warn me. Just showed up one morning in a rental car, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly revenue, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my car. I was in the booth, going over the week's numbers with Marcus, when I saw her pull in. She parked in one of the daily spots, didn't pay, I noticed, and walked toward the booth with that same stride she'd always had, the one that suggested the world should rearrange itself to accommodate her. "Tommy." "Amelia. I heard about your little venture. Mom told you. Mom told me you were being selfish and ungrateful, which usually means you've done something interesting." She looked around the lot, taking in the food trucks, the seating area, the workers eating lunch and chatting in small groups. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, a sad little parking lot with weeds growing through the cracks. Something pathetic that I could feel sorry about." She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were the same as they'd always been, sharp, calculating, beautiful in a way that had always made people underestimate how intelligent she was. "This isn't pathetic." "Thank you, I think. It's actually quite clever, the partnerships, the food trucks, the community angle." She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. Grandfather would have approved. The mention of grandfather hit me somewhere unexpected. I hadn't thought about him in months, hadn't let myself think about him. The business had become its own thing, separate from the inheritance, separate from the insult of receiving it. "Why are you here, Amelia?" She was quiet for a moment. Looked around the lot again, looked at me. "I'm selling the villa." I hadn't expected that. "Why?" "Because it's a money pit. Because the staff costs more than I make in a year. Because the taxes are insane and the repairs are constant, and I've spent the last 2 years hemorrhaging cash trying to maintain a property that I thought would make me happy. And instead has made me miserable. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know what I was supposed to feel. "I'm sorry," I said. "Because what else do you say?" "Don't be sorry, I made a choice. I took the villa because it was beautiful and I wanted it, and I didn't think about whether I could actually afford to keep it." She paused. "You made a different choice. You took something that looked worthless and you figured out how to make it valuable. That's not luck, Tommy, that's work." "I didn't take it. Grandfather gave it to me." "He gave you an opportunity. You're the one who turned it into something." She put her sunglasses back on. "I'm not here to ask for money, if that's what you're worried about. I just wanted to see it, to see what you'd done. And I'm impressed. And a little jealous, if I'm being honest. And—" She trailed off, looking at something over my shoulder. The seating area, I realized. The workers sitting there, eating and talking. And I wish I'd gotten the parking lot instead of the villa. I think it might have been better for me. She left after that. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't make any demands. Just got in her rental car and drove away. I stood in the booth and watched her go, and I thought about grandfather. About why he'd given me the lot. About whether he'd known somehow what would happen. About whether the gift had been cruel or kind, and whether it was possible for something to be both at once. The letter arrived 6 months later. It was forwarded from my grandfather's lawyer, who'd found it while cleaning out old files. The envelope was yellowed and wrinkled, with my name written in grandfather's handwriting. That distinctive, slightly shaky script he'd had even before his hands started trembling from age. Inside was a single page. "Thomas, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll have received your inheritance. I imagine you're confused, possibly angry. Your mother certainly will be. I want to explain, though I'm not sure I can. Some things are easier to do than to justify. I bought that lot in 1972 with money I'd scraped together from my first real success. It was supposed to be the start of something, a business, a legacy, a foundation for everything that would come after. But life happened. Other opportunities arose. I forgot about the lot for years, decades even, until a lawyer reminded me it still existed. I kept it anyway. Kept it because it reminded me of who I was when I had nothing, when the only thing I had was potential and the willingness to work. Your sister is talented and beautiful and successful, and she will always be fine. The world is built for people like Amelia. It opens doors for them, makes way for them, assumes they belong. You are different. The world does not make way for you. You have to make your own way, carve your own path, build your own foundation. That's harder. It's also, I believe, more valuable. The lot is not a gift. It's a question. What will you do with nothing? What will you build when no one expects you to build anything? Who will you become when the only thing you have is potential and the willingness to work? I don't know if you'll answer the question the way I hope. I don't know if you'll turn that empty space into something real, but I know you have the capacity for it. I've seen it in you, even when no one else has, even when you haven't seen it in yourself. Whatever happens, know that I believed in you. Not because you were talented or beautiful or successful, but because you were stubborn, because you didn't give up, because you had something in you that the world couldn't give and couldn't take away. That's worth more than a villa in Lake Como. That's worth more than anything I could have left you. Your grandfather, Harold. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in my pocket and went outside. The lot was busy that day. All 24 spaces full, 3 food trucks operating. The seating area crowded with workers on their lunch breaks. Marcus handling the booth while I did what I usually did. Walked around, talked to people, made sure everything was running smoothly. It was ordinary, completely ordinary. Just another Tuesday at Patricia's place. But I looked at it differently now. Looked at the cracked asphalt that I'd patched, the fence that I'd fixed, the booth that I'd rebuilt. looked at the people who came here every day because I'd given them a place to come. And I understood, finally, what grandfather had given me. Not a parking lot, not an insult, a question, and I had answered it. The call from my mother came that evening. I was sitting in the booth, going over the day's receipts, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, and conversations with my mother were never restful. But something made me pick up. Thomas. Her voice was strange, not angry, not disappointed, something else. Mom, I need to tell you something. I waited. Outside, the last car of the day was pulling out of the lot, and Marcus was starting to close the gate. I found a letter, she said, from your grandfather. It was in a box of his things that I'd never opened. I don't know why I opened it today. I just did. A letter? It was about you, about why he gave you the lot. She paused. I could hear her breathing on the other end, unsteady, like she was trying not to cry. He said he believed in you. He said you had something that the world couldn't give and couldn't take away. He said, I know, I said. He wrote me one too. Silence, then very quietly, I owe you an apology, Thomas. I didn't know what to say. In 35 years, my mother had never apologized to me. Not once. Not for anything. For what? For laughing at the reading of the will, for thinking that your grandfather was punishing you when he was actually, she stopped, took a breath, for never believing in you the way he did. The words hung there between us. It's okay, Mom. It's not, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. She paused again. Your lot, your business, it's really something, isn't it? It's something, I agreed. I'm proud of you, she said. I should have said that a long time ago. I'm proud of the person you've become. Didn't cry, not quite, but something in my chest loosened that had been tight for as long as I could remember. Thank you, Mom. Thank your grandfather, she said. He knew you better than any of us. That night, after I locked up the lot and drove back to my apartment, a real apartment now, with actual furniture and a bedroom with a door, I sat on my couch and thought about questions. About the ones we ask and the ones we're asked. About the ones that have answers and the ones that don't. Grandfather had asked me a question. What will you do with nothing? And I had answered it. Not with words, but with work. With 3 years of waking up before dawn and staying until dark. With every crack I'd filled and every fence I'd fixed, and every person I'd welcomed onto that 0.73 acres of cracked asphalt and stubborn weeds. I had built something, not an empire, my mother was wrong about that, but something real, something useful, something that mattered to people who weren't me, and that, I realized, was enough. It had always been enough. The lot is still there. It's been 5 years now since the reading of the will. The seating area has a real roof now, not corrugated metal. The food trucks have become permanent fixtures. Raoul bought his own spot and set up a proper kitchen. We added bike racks and a small repair station after Patricia mentioned that some of her workers were cycling in from the bus stop. I hired 2 more attendants. Started offering overnight parking for truck drivers who needed somewhere safe to rest. Partnered with a nonprofit that provides job training for recently incarcerated people. They do some of the maintenance now, learning skills they can use when they move on. The lot isn't just a parking lot anymore. It's a hub, a gathering place, a piece of community that exists because someone believed it could. Amelia visits sometimes. She sold the villa 2 years ago and moved back to the States. Not to New Jersey, but close enough that she can drive out on weekends. She says she likes seeing what I've built. Says it reminds her that value isn't always obvious. My parents come too, occasionally. My mother still doesn't entirely understand what I do, but she stopped suggesting I sell. My father mostly just nods and looks around and says things like, "You've really got something here." And I have. I really do, not because grandfather gave me something valuable, but because he trusted me to make something valuable out of nothing. That's the thing about questions I've learned. The important ones don't have obvious answers. They have answers you have to discover or create, or build out of nothing but stubbornness and work. What will you do with nothing? I built a life. I built something real. I built an answer to a question I didn't know I was being asked. The last time I was at the lot, yesterday actually, I stood in the spot where that seagull had been standing 5 years ago. The asphalt is smoother now, patched and repaved and painted with fresh lines. The drainage ditch is clean, planted with native grasses that filter the runoff and actually look kind of nice. The booth has Wi-Fi and a coffee maker, and a small shelf of books that workers can borrow and return whenever they want. It's not the same place it was, and I'm not the same person I was. I stood there for a long time, watching the morning arrivals, the familiar faces, the new ones, the people who had made this place their own, watching the food trucks set up and the seating area fill and the small, ordinary miracle of community happening right in front of me. And I thought about Grandfather, about his letter, about the question he'd asked, and the faith he'd placed in someone who hadn't yet earned it. What will you do with nothing? Everything, I thought. Everything I possibly can. There's no real ending to this story. That's something I've realized over the years. Real life doesn't have endings, not the way stories do. It just has moments, changes, points where you look back and realize something shifted. This is one of those moments, I suppose. Standing in my lot, watching the morning light spread across the asphalt, thinking about how far I've come and how far I still have to go. The business is stable now, profitable even. I could expand. There's talk of buying the lot next door, of building something bigger. But I'm not sure I want that. What I have is enough. More than enough. What I have is a question answered. What I have is a life built out of nothing. What I have is exactly what my grandfather wanted me to have. And every morning when I unlock the gate and turn on the lights and watch the first car pull in, I think about him. Not with grief, not with confusion, just with gratitude. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For believing in me when no one else did. For giving me an empty parking lot and trusting me to fill it with something real. The seagull came back once, about 2 years in. I was closing up for the night, and there it was, standing in the middle of the lot, staring at me with that same tilted head expression, like it was checking on its investment, like it wanted to see what I'd done with the place since it left. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, alone in my lot at dusk. "Not bad, right?" I said to it. The seagull didn't answer, but it stayed for a while before flying off, circled the lot once, twice, 3 times, and then it was gone, heading east toward the highway, toward the sound of traffic that was, I realized, no longer the only sound I could hear. Now there was music from Raoul's kitchen, conversation from the seating area, the hum of life happening, right here, in this place that wasn't supposed to be anything. In this place that had become everything. So that's the story. Not a revenge story, though my family might have expected one. Not a rags to riches story, though I suppose the bones are there. Just a story about a question and an answer. About an empty lot and the person who filled it. About what happens when someone believes in you before you believe in yourself. Grandfather knew. He knew I would figure it out. And he was right. He was right about all of it. 3 months ago, I framed his letter and hung it in the booth. Workers ask about it sometimes. "Who's Harold?" they say, pointing to the signature. "My grandfather," I tell them. "He gave me this place." "Nice inheritance," they say, and I smile, because they don't know. They don't know about the villa in Lake Como, or the laughter at the reading of the will, or the years I spent wondering if I was worthless. They just see a parking lot. A busy, functional, improbable parking lot in the middle of nowhere. They see the answer. They don't need to know the question. This morning, before I left for work, I stood on my balcony and looked east, toward the highway, toward the lot, toward the life I never expected to have. And I thought about the person I was 5 years ago, standing in the rain, watching cars pass, wondering what I was supposed to do with 0.73 acres of nothing. I wish I could tell that person, it's going to be okay, better than okay. It's going to be exactly what you need. But I couldn't tell him. He had to figure it out himself. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. I don't know what comes next. More years, I hope. More workers, more food trucks. More ordinary days that add up to something extraordinary. More questions, more answers, more life built out of nothing. And somewhere, I hope, somewhere in whatever comes after this, Grandfather is watching and nodding and knowing that he was right. That the lot was never a punishment. It was a gift, the best gift anyone ever gave me, the end, or not. Real life doesn't have endings, it just has mornings, and tomorrow I'll get up early and drive to my lot and unlock the gate and turn on the lights and wait for the first car to pull in. And, as always, same as forever, and that will be enough.